Welcome back live, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore, the voice of atheism in southeast Wisconsin. We are coming to you, as always, from the Bucket Works location here in the Grand Avenue Mall. Flying solo today. Brian not with us. And we're coming to you at a special time. It's Saturday. Listen to us on Periscope and Meerkat. Join the chat live by hitting the chat button there on Mixlr while you listen, and you can talk to our guest. We're very excited to have her. She's an author, a researcher, an analyst, a historian, an inventor, a former algebra and mathematics instructor. Her Asherah websites have had over 130,000 page views from 97 different countries. We are very excited to have with us from North Carolina, Darlene Kosnik. Welcome, Darlene.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, thanks for joining us again here the second time in 10 minutes as we give it a go here on the podcast. You are studying the Lost Goddess. Tell us how you got started in that and what you're involved in.
I actually got started in it watching my young high school students, and so many of the young ladies were coming into the class, and they were very smart, intellectual, talented, but yet they had real poor feelings about themselves and were lacking in self-esteem. So the question becomes, what is it about our culture that marginalizes and demeans so many of these young people? And as we start looking back into the historical record, it doesn't take much research before you start realizing that what people claim is history is not always the case. So one quickly discovers that it's only through the archaeology that we're able to get an accurate picture of what was going on back then. So I started collecting and amassing artifacts that were relevant to women's history. So Asherah is actually the first book in a series about women's history, and I knew I had to do this one first because of the complexity of the Hebrew inscriptions. And I knew that if I didn't address it now, I wouldn't want to take the time away from the other books later on to address them. So that is how we got History's Vanquished Goddess Asherah, and that's how she came about.
So you have directly tied religious history to the marginalization of the modern female. Is that fair to say?
Yes, not intentionally, but that is where the archaeology led.
Yeah, and I think, and this topic is very important for our team because when you see in the Abrahamic faiths, it is very misogynistic. I mean, the God is male. You know, all the major figures are male. You know, but if you go into the ancient world, you start to see how important the goddess figures were. So yeah, if you can take us back to where Asherah was first seen and why she was so important.
Oh, we actually find her first references in the epigraphic information back on the Nippur god list, and this is one of the oldest cities of Sumer, and it goes back to 2112 BCE, and all of my dates will be BCE in case I forget to mention that. So we go back to the Nippur, and then that leads right into the Babylonian time, and here we come across several ancient titles of hers. And there's a whole list of them, and we realize that this is a person or a deity of great importance and significance at that particular point in time. And if we have time, I'd like to return to this Amorite stuff because they actually are the founders and the first kings of Jerusalem, and so we have a couple little interesting twists back in that story too. But when we're looking specifically at Asherah, if you remember reading about the great Babylonian king Hammurabi, we found the archaeologists have discovered some King Hammurabi Asherah dedicatory inscriptions. And not only did we find the inscriptions, but they've also found a bronze statue of him, and he's kneeling before the goddess. And this is a very significant find, to find such a dynamic personality from history, and to be able to include it in Asherah's history.
So Hammurabi is a powerful man in ancient history, doesn't it? What changed? How did the goddess become that?
Now, you say that there is
that would have occurred about 621 with the Deuteronomistic writers from the Bible. And they viewed her as a threat in the rise of patriarchy and monotheism. and a powerful male priesthood that was emerging at the time. So they had no room for anyone else, and so she had to go. By the way, at that particular point in time, she was the last goddess still remaining. There were several other ones that were part of the religious pantheon, but by that time they were all eliminated with the exception of her yet.
Now,
On the goddess side. I'm talking about the female side right now.
Is she the earliest goddess that there's evidence for, or are there goddesses that even predate her?
There may be some that predate her. I haven't looked at the Inanna and Isis traditions. They might be fairly close because we're talking about the beginning of the inscriptional evidence, but I haven't really done a comparison between them. But she is definitely one of the earliest that we have some good records for and a historical chronological history.
Yeah, the goddesses, yeah, she's absolutely right with Isis and Inanna. You have many, and even others that predate them. Yeah, she's absolutely right. But the really interesting point with Asherah is that she was married to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Darlene, she was married to El, which is the supreme deity, the god of gods in the Canaanite religion. And then you start to see how that influences the Judaism. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, you are exactly correct. The chief Canaanite and the initial Hebrew god was El. And then El eventually assimilated into and became absorbed by Yahweh. And as Yahweh appropriated El's attributes and his characteristics, along with that came his wife, Asherah. And then that's where the significance of the association with Asherah came really heavily into play, because it was because of this, coupled with the rise of monotheism, that Asherah had to be vanquished. Now, on a side note here, in case any of your viewers may be wondering, what exactly is going on here, and I hadn't heard before about the association between El and Yahweh, ask yourself, why is it called Israel with EL on the end and not Israel Yahweh? So here we have another clear historical record of what was actually occurring at that particular point in time, despite what the biblical writers had led us to believe.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important parts. So now, correct me if I'm wrong too, and this is where it gets really interesting for me. We're led to believe that the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and I guess the Baha'i, if you count them, have one God, and it's a male God, and there aren't any other gods. But there's multiple places in the Bible where you'll see how there's other passages that point out there are multiple gods. But do we have any archaeological evidence that show Yahweh and Asherah being married or being together?
Yes, there are a couple, and I've made mention of them, and I show pictures of them in the book itself. We have a picture of them being depicted upon a Judahite seal, cylinder seal, and it shows that you have Yahweh depicted in a sphinx above a sphinx, and Asherah is depicted above her sacred tree. And then there was another piece also where we actually have a coin that has a picture of Yahweh and Asherah, Anat, Astarte, these three goddesses assimilated together. They were the three great goddesses of the Iron Age at that particular time. And we have Yahweh depicted with them also. So we also have records from El Fantini where we have Anat being described as a goddess of Asherah, or as Yahweh's wife. I'm flipping through my book here as I'm trying to find the exact reference for you. So we do have archaeological information to indicate that yes, indeed, they definitely were a pair.
I mean, I think that's like just, for me, that blew me away when I first found that out, because, again, all my life I've been told it's one God, it's a male God, and then you see these two, and they're married, and Asherah is actually the wife of Yahweh, the wife of God. I mean, that to me makes a lot more sense when you look at the ancient mythologies and how all of the other gods were married, or the goddess was a very important part of various cults. I mean, you had the Isis cult in Egypt. That was one of the biggest cults. I think it makes sense, So, I mean, this is just huge, huge information for people that don't know, I think.
Exactly. And if you look at what was going on in the ancient Near East at that particular time, all of the mythologies across that entire area had the male and the female. It was just the natural order of the day. And so for the early Jewish tradition to try to subvert that, that was quite a deviation from that particular point in time. And they weren't able to really pull that off until about 622 BCE. So she was with us, and the other goddesses were with us for quite some long time before they were able to carry it off here and before it actually worked its way into our culture. Now, while you're talking about all of them, can I mention in just a minute that her worship actually encompassed across 13 different nations? And although we can't really call them nations as we know them today, I guess it would be more appropriate to call them like a historical area. But across these 13 historical areas, we have Ammon, Moab, Edom, Israel, and Judah, and the rest of them there. Now, they had 12 different chief male gods worship, but yet only one goddess. So we had Asherah permeating across all of these, or one of her variant forms. And so that says an awful lot about the significance and the importance that she had to the people. And in all of these areas, she retained her status as the mother goddess, the mother of the gods, and the primary wife of each of the chief male gods for each particular neighboring historical area there. So that's quite a feat and quite an accomplishment in a vast area that was being canvassed there.
Oh, absolutely. And can you just, for the listeners, can you just kind of explain a little of her story? Like, who is she and why is she important and what does she represent?
She represented many different aspects, as did many of the deities back in those days. She was a mother goddess, many of her artifactual artifacts have pictures of her depicted as a naked goddess. And as a naked goddess, she was an expression of the procreative and nurturing power of the female or nature itself. And many of these, she also held vegetative stalks, like lotus blossoms or vine. And this was her aspect as a prosperity vegetation goddess. And that meant that she was providing the blessings of the land to the people. So she represented the idea of the mother of fertility, which in that barren area there was a great blessing for them all. So she actually personified the source of life and like growth and regeneration. In addition to, we also have other aspects of her, like for instance, she's mentioned in childbirth prayer. So if you were, let me find the date on that one, if you were giving birth about 3,000 years ago, you may have been using a childbirth prayer to Asherah, and this was written in a Phoenician dialect very similar to the biblical Hebrew. And in this particular prayer, you were asking for childbirth assistance, and what's real interesting is it actually identifies Asherah as a goddess of eternity. Meetings that were attributed to her, as was common back in those days for the deities. We also have her in the aspect as a wizard of Asherah. And back in Tanash, we had a situation, and we found Egyptian correspondence where an Egyptian general was writing to the prince of the city, and he wanted his fortune to be read and his prophecy to be told, and then he wanted that forwarded to him. And that was around 1500 BCE. So it was a long-established residence and well-known, apparently, if you had people from Egyptian asking for information.
We're talking to Darlene Kosnik. She's an author and researcher, and she exposes the lost goddess, Asherah in particular. We're talking about one of the oldest goddesses, and it fascinates me that you are involved in actual archaeology, or the study of Asherah involves actual archaeology and the discovery and reclaiming of artifacts, of actual objects which prove the existence of these goddesses. And much of what we do here at Mythicist Milwaukee is enjoy Jesus myth theory, which in fact approaches a problem from the opposite angle, which is trying to find evidence for the existence of a potentially completely mythological subject. Is it easier? What you have going on seems to be it's just hidden from the public, but it's actually proven and easily verifiable. Is there a sense that there's a place for this in the larger secular movement, or is this purely become fun research for you?
I would hope that it might eventually find its way into the mainstream, but a lot of these inscriptional information, like for instance the ones that pair Asherah and Yahweh from Quintilla to Druid, the ones that are on the YouTube video and Herbert L. Quam, they've been out for decades, in common knowledge among the archaeologists for about 40 years, and it hasn't made its way out yet, but we hope eventually that it will. And with the internet and with people like you bringing this type of information forth for so many people, I think that eventually it will come out. Now, would you like to hear a little bit more about some of her titles?
Absolutely.
Okay, I got something I think you're going to find quite interesting. When we go back to the Ugaritic tablets, which date to about 1440 BCE, now she was a very prominent sea goddess and inland goddess, but some of her titles included Lady Asherah of the Sea and the Lady Who Treads on the Sea. So with her title of the Lady Who Treads on the Sea, we actually see her walking on water over 1,400 years before this is attributed to Jesus of Nazareth. Now, in addition, one of her servants was a fisherman of the Lady Asherah of the Sea. So again, hundreds of years before we see Jesus' apostles as a fisherman, we see that prevalent across her attributes and characteristics. And then her servant, the fisherman of the sea, fishes for her, saddles her donkey in silver and gold, and places her upon the donkey saddle for a donkey ride. So again, we're seeing that this entire event is preceding the donkey ride of Jesus of Nazareth by over 1,400 years. So we see all of these that are indicators of the importance of her being a sea goddess, but we also have other epithets of her, such as Lady of the Steep, Grassy Meadowland, or Mistress of the Plain, that indicate she was also a very prominent inland goddess. So she was a goddess of quite a lot of significance across a vast area that included an awful lot of people at the time.
I'm seeing her and Jesus in a duet singing "Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better" now. From the old show. That's fascinating stuff and absolutely new to me. I don't see archaeologist on your list of your incredible list of accomplishments and titles and whatnot. Have you been out to some of these sites? Do you get to get your hands dirty?
I have been out and doing some research over in Greece and Crete, but I have not gone over to the ancient Near East area. I've kind of stayed away from there due to the turbulent times over there. But fortunately for us, we have so much scholarly activity that once you find something, it's pretty well verifiable in another source. Everything has been checked and rechecked a couple times over to make sure everything is credible.
Yeah, the next time you're in Greece, actually, let us know. We have a researcher and journalist out there who's a friend of ours. And
you guys?
I'm sorry?
Oh, is that... Are you guys going over there for more research? Or
no. Actually, I was just there. Like 6 months ago. Actually, next week we have our friend coming on, Minas Papageorgiou from Greece. He's a journalist and he's into the same information that we study. And he actually took me on a pagan ritual of a group of people who still believe in the ancient Greek gods and. I got to experience that. So yeah, next time you're in Greece, let us know. We can connect you guys, and that'd be great.
Oh, that would be great. Anytime you can get additional firsthand input is really an asset here and expands your knowledge more in your database. Gives you more of a macrocosmic feel for what's going on.
Absolutely. And there was one point you had given us that I think is very interesting. In Hosea, you see Yahweh is divorcing someone. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, that's a very intriguing passage and area there. And this might be a very good example of this being a time when the Bible can be its own worst enemy. Because when you ask the question, if there is no wife, who exactly is Yahweh divorcing? And when you look at the Hosea biblical speech there, he refers specifically to Yahweh's wife and calls her the mother of his audience. Now, traditionally, we've all been told that this is to be interpreted as a metaphor of marriage between God and Israel. However, if you do a careful reading of Hosea in its totality, it actually very clearly identifies Israel as a child of Yahweh. So therefore, of course, it can't be married to Yahweh. However, Yahweh also continues in this Hosea speech, and he strips her naked, sets her out into the desert, and then exposes her, and I'll use the words private parts, although the language is very crude and graphic there in the biblical text. So he's stripping her and exposing her to shame her and subjugate her. Now, this isn't the type of vulgar behavior that you would attribute to a country. This is very specifically talking about the treatment of a woman, and there's really no way of denying that Asherah is here when you read the entire text. Now, any 8th century BCE Israelite, if he would have heard Hosea speaking and using the phrase Yahweh's wife and the mother of his audience, he would have explicitly known he was talking about Asherah. There could be no doubt in his mind at all about it.
This is in the book of Hosea.
Yes, correct.
Do you have no chapter and verse on that?
Let me see. How's 2:4-7.12.
Nice. Thank you.
That's very good.
And
oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I think I walked over you there.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I was going to take you somewhere else, but I don't remember where it was.
That's all right.
I'm
You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee show. We'll get on a station break here. The podcast receives support from CRAFT, the Kenosha Racine area freethinkers. We come to you every week at Sunday. We're doing a special edition here Saturday to talk to a very interesting author and researcher, analyst, historian, etc., and inventor. Tell us what you invented, Darlene.
Oh, okay. At the time, I was working on a calculator, a specialized calculator, and I was actually working on it physically, a little physical unit itself, but under the intellectual property laws, it would have also encompassed a computer software application. And then the other one I was working on was a TENS system, which is a transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation system, to help relieve migraine headaches. And this is actually one of the things that drove me into studying archaeology and into this area, because I started getting called into IRS audits, and I started getting called into audits and tech scores, and I thought, I better find a different area to start working. So I thought I would be spending my retirement years working on those inventions, but no, I haven't gotten back to them yet, but I plan on it.
I'm going to say, we appreciate this line of work much more. So,
thank you.
and like most of our guests, you make me feel stupid and useless with your
come on
your eclectic tastes and talents.
Well, and I think this topic, and I think why it's, to me, I don't know, I could be wrong, but to me, I think this topic is so important because from the empowerment of women and from the the feminist standpoint, I mean, what is more important to know that you had this goddess that cultures worshipped equally to the male gods. I mean, this, again, all of our lives, and if you go into the Middle East or if you go into Muslim country, there, areas, extremist Muslim areas, you'll see how the feminine, the divine feminine, has been kind of stripped away, and that's why I think this work is just so important.
That's interesting that you should say that, because our Facebook page really surprised us, because we came out with our numbers of 46% male and 48% of the female in terms of the likes on it. So we almost have a perfect split in the numbers. So the return of the feminine it's a quest that many of us are on, and I think Goethe had it correct when he said that the internal feminine draws us on.
That's a beautiful quote, and I think I absolutely agree. And it's reflected in popular culture. We see movies all the time now that feature strong feminine heroes, and I think it's
about time.
It is about time, and it's not surprising that the modern male is coming around to realize that women have more to offer than they've been allowed to share for so long. Do you feel like an activist at all? Is there any of that in you, or are you really hooked on the research here?
I'm just an analyst and a researcher. I'm not I don't think I've done much in the way of real activism other than just trying to get the message forward and out to the people.
I'd say that's important enough.
Indeed, and we're here to help you do that today. She's Darlene Kosnik, calling us from North Carolina, and has written a book and is the beginning of a series of books on missing goddesses. Did I hear you right when you said that?
Yes, correct. Yes.
What would be next?
The next one is Paleolithic female imagery, so it'll be the Old Stone Age.
Oh, excellent.
Nice.
What
do you make of the pop culture rise of the feminine, the lost goddess, the Da Vinci Code thing, Jesus, was he married, was he not? Do you have any take on that? Do you think Jesus existed? Do you think it was all myth? Do you think he was married? Do you think he? How do you relate the missing feminine goddess to the New Testament?
To the New Testament.
Yeah, the marginalization of the book of the Gospel of Mary. I mean, we see the female being pushed into the background, right into the New Testament, and obviously into the
the Gospels,
too.
The canonical Gospels that were chosen, the Orthodox Gospels. Yeah, you're right. It's missing. If you look at the Gnostic Gospels, you'll see Mary Magdalene and Mary were these prominent figures, and you're right. The Orthodox Gospels that were chosen. There is no representation.
So I guess my question to Darlene is: have you looked at that at all? Are you pretty much stuck in the BCE?
Yeah, so far I've been pretty much in the BCE, and I'm looking for the facts. I want to know the facts, not someone's interpretation. And when you start talking about the factual information in relation to Jesus and the New Testament and even the Old Testament, we find it sorely lacking here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is what I was getting at. We're kind of the opposite approach. We're trying to figure out if Jesus ever existed, and you're trying to show people that this goddess did in fact exist, and there's actual evidence for it. Instead of scholarly research, as well thought out as it is, it's always going to be extrapolated information that people will argue over. But I think the goddess phenomenon, the missing goddess phenomenon, has traction, and I think it's apparent in pop culture, and I think the modern man is ready to embrace that.
I agree. And I was wondering, Darlene, if you could talk to the Ugarit titles, the mythology, and kind of how they are parallel to what we see in the Old Testament.
In addition to the ones that I just mentioned there in relation to Jesus, the ones that were attributed to him later on, we also had some other interesting things happen there. She actually shared in the creation with her husband El, and then we see that reflected later in the biblical wisdom, which is also a transformation of the goddess Asherah. And in the Ugaritic text, what else is quite interesting is that all of the gods are identified as the 70 sons of Asherah. But, and here's something, also she is identified as the mother of Yahweh. And of course, that is something that they don't want broadcast too much in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament there. So 700 years after she's mentioned on this god list, and then years before, hundreds of years before the beginning of the first biblical writing, we see that there was a great deal of information out here about her and her importance and significance to the people at that time.
Yeah, that's great. I was wondering now, this is a piece for me. When you look at Islam and you look at Arabia before Islam, pre-Islam, you see the goddesses Al-Ilat, Alat. Are these related to Asherah? I mean, was this kind of like an offshoot? You did have at Mecca, you had the worship of these goddesses at Mecca. Is there any connection there?
Well, that's interesting that you brought that topic up, because we actually have a commemorative plaque on a temple pillar by a priest that praises Asherah herself 4 times, and that's at North Arabia, and that dates to about 549. So we know that Asherah was worshipped in that particular area at that particular time. That's sometimes all you can say about some of these. But we also know at 1000 BCE that she was also the wife of the moon god in South Arabia, because we have an inscription for that. Now, when you move back to about 1200 BCE, we have the Lachish temple vase, and on that one, Asherah is and she's depicted and identified by her epithet of Elat. And the Proto-Hebrew and Proto-Canaanite on that is E-L-A-T. Now, this is analogous. It means the goddess, and it's analogous to the Elat of the pre-Islamic tradition, which also means the goddess. So there is some speculation that, yes, we do have a correlation between them. Now, I haven't gotten into that a lot myself, but there have been some scholars that have debated that, and they have also contended that that Elat actually evolved from the feminine form into the masculine form, Allah. And whether or not that is the case, I have not gotten into that study yet, but we do know that the crescent moon of Elat, the goddess, is often depicted on the Islamic flags.
That's correct, the crescent moon.
Tell us about the sacred tree and the menorah. How do those relate?
Another very interesting topic. The menorah has traditionally and historically been claimed to have been a stylized almond tree. And trees are very important in that ancient Near East because you're talking about an arid landscape there. And the almond tree in particular was the first to bloom, so it always signaled the beginning of vegetation in the area. Also, the edible part and its seed are identical to each other. So the tree itself was considered a beginning and end unto itself. Now that correlates with the almond tree's Semitic etymology, where it retains its botanical name, meaning great mother, image of all living, and then that's identified in Rome as the great mother goddess. And one of her attributes was that she was a beginning and an end unto herself. Now, specifically, when you look for the Jewish interpretation, we have Philo of Alexandria, and he described the light of the menorah like the biblical Sarah and a sort of spiritualized great mother or virgin mother. And he professed that it embodied the cosmic principle. Then about 1,000 years later, the Jewish Zohar described the association with the goddess and said that the lighting of the menorah lampstand devised to tell the people of the community of Israel was receiving the light while the mother is crowned and all the lamps were illuminated from her. So we got some pretty heavy stuff there. Yeah, your traditional now modern representation would be the light, wisdom, and divine inspiration, and those are all goddess attributes and characteristics. And so we have a symbolization of Asherah, and she's being personified by the menorah. Now, in addition to that, we have all of these historical records, but we also have some iconography in the archaeology. So we can go back to that Lachish temple vase with the word Elat deliberately placed over a 7-branch pre-Menoric tree, and you can't get a picture much plainer than that. So we have both archaeological and historical evidence that the menorah itself is designed after the goddess Asherah.
And you also make a connection between the sacred tree and equivalency, and tell us about the pubic triangle interchange.
Yes, exactly, yes. We have Ruth Hestron, when she was at the Israel Museum, analyzing these ancient Near East artifacts and seeing them being substituted throughout both areas, or the entire area. The three of them were interchangeably with each other on the different types of the painted Palestinian vases. Then that was substantiated later in the Journal of the American Society of Oriental Research. So we have a lot of evidence. It's been there a long time, but it hasn't been making its way out to the general public yet. But I see you guys are doing an excellent job bringing that out.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Well, we try real. Go ahead.
We also have, in the records, we have an Egyptian general that is mandating a report from one of the Tanash kings. It's actually using what's called the finger of Asherah. This is a lunar date, and he tells the king that he would like his letter and his report due to him by the finger of Asherah, which is the end of the moon, when the crescent moon is actually approaching Venus. So in this particular instance, in this correspondence, we find that we have the lunar date of the finger of Asherah being used specifically, amongst this correspondence and the people, and that this was also a well-known feature, an attribute of her in her aspect as the Queen of Heaven.
That's fascinating. And I was wondering, Darlene, if you can talk to, out of your book, I see you talk about the sacred prostitute. If you can kind of expound on that a little, because I know some people might be familiar with Mary Magdalene as being portrayed as a prostitute. How does this correlate to Asherah?
Well, if you look at the way a lot of the writers historically have depicted holy women, and even some of the old terms that were used to mean and to indicate priestesses were actually reinterpreted by some of these writers, historians, to say holy prostitute or the prostitute. So when you look at the hundreds of artifacts that we have that depict the naked goddesses, the initial labeling on these was that they were sacred prostitutes. However, this entire area has been denoted and completely denied now by scholarship. It's an idea that it never came to be, and it was never supposed to be. It was just an interesting segmentation of someone's imagination, probably more indicative of their own thinking rather than what the historical record revealed. I hope I'm not coming on too strong.
No, not at all. That would make more sense. I mean, that thing needs to be challenged if that is not the case. Absolutely.
One person's mistranslation, basically, is what we're talking about, right?
Right. Well, and then you see, I don't know if you can talk to this too, Darlene, but, and forgive me, I'm not really the best with the Old Testament, but I know there are a lot of passages that refer to how you need to burn the Asherah or somehow destroy the Asherah. I mean, this is obviously after the Canaanite religion had lost all of Asherah, but you do see in the Old Testament somehow where they're telling people they have to essentially destroy Asherah. I mean, can you talk to any of that?
Correct. Yes, that's interesting also because it's very clear in the biblical text. In fact, the biblical texts themselves actually call the holy trees Asherahs. So the smaller case, Asherah, was a symbol for the uppercase A of Asherah, the goddess. So when you see the biblical texts where they talk about tearing them down, burning them, destroying them, they're all talking about the symbols, her symbols that they were worshiping. And they all knew at the time that those symbols represented the deity itself. And if you even look at the pictures of, like, for instance, the throne of Vatican City and the altar, you will see great big pillared trees there and stylized trees, and those were all also remnants from the old Asherah. So by burning, tearing down, destroying, you're actually eliminating Asherah herself, or, all the references to her. Now, when you talk about biblical deletions and changes, we also have a couple excellent examples in Genesis itself, where they've made, sometimes they call it a scribal error, and sometimes it's a deliberate change. But in this particular case, you have Leah's maid giving birth to the two sons of Leah's husband. So Leah names the babies Gad and Asherah. Well, Asherah is not included here in the text. However, when the text is reconstructed back to its original meaning, or original interpretation and translation, you actually get Leah cried with Asherah's help, for maidens must call me happy. So she calls his name Asher. So you see that as a direct example on the elimination of her name from the text. And we have that occurring in about, 6 or 8 passages where even Yahweh usurps some of Asherah's blessings of the land, and pilfers them over and incorporates them into the tradition, his tradition, just to try to annihilate her and eliminate her from the text. Another one is also around Deuteronomy, at the right hand of Asherah. Due to a scribal error, that was eliminated from a lot of the text.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common occurrence, if I'm not wrong. I mean, if you look at Muhammad, or the way I like to say it, the cult of Muhammad, I mean, his followers were ripping down, the Al-Ilat temples and the goddess temples in Arabia. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Although
of course, Asher we see is a name that exists still today, so the effect ripples to the modern age of masculinizing the name itself.
Now, in fact, if we look also at some of the words that they use, the biblical writers use themselves for Asherah, you'll see the word Ashtoreth, and the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible and the Bulletin of the American Schools of Oriental Research have come out and said this is a deliberate Hebrew misvocalization of the name of the Canaanite goddess. And they combined that with the words and substituted the vowels of the Hebrew shem in there in order to create they alter and revise and redact. They also created, too, to make sure that they marginalized and subjugated, those things that they thought would be a threat to Yahweh and his worship.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of it all, huh? It's like the goddess is threatening the male god.
Yes, but we do have a very good representation of a Yahweh king making a presentation before the goddess. In the city of Byblos there, we have the inscription after the god. The god is actually doing a presentation, and inscriptionally it tells us that he is dedicating it to his goddess, Lady of Byblos. And in this particular case, it's interpreted to be the Lot Jabal, who is identified with Asherah. So deny it as much as they can and change as much as they did back in those days. They still had just enough left there that they couldn't reach it all and they couldn't permeate through it all. We still have remnants here and there that remind us of the importance of their worship back at that time. We also have a king that was named after Asherah. We have an Amorite king, Kabdi Ashurta, and this translates literally to mean servant of the goddess Asherah. So her legacy is vast and great, and we have a lot of archaeological records to prove it. Now, another thing you might find quite interesting is that an epitaph of Asherah is actually Eve. So we actually have her being associated with Eve in the first millennium BCE. So they believe that due to her historical serpent association that we probably have another myth that's been embedded inside that Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden narrative there. It's been lost in time, the original one lost in time, and then this being just a reflux of it. And then on a side note to Eve, I'd also kind of like to just mention that although God instructed Adam not to eat the fruit of the tree in Genesis 2:16, Eve was not given that directive because she wasn't created until Genesis 2:22. Now, I'm just saying, guys, sometimes the stories don't fit quite as neatly as they try to make them out.
Yeah, well, that's what we like to point out. I mean, that's our whole thing, absolutely.
We've got about 10 minutes left. It's the Mythicist Milwaukee show, and we are talking to Darlene Kosnik. That's with a K, Kosnik. Visitors or listeners are asking about you, so that's encouraging, Darlene. And I want to take you back to the beginning here. You have come a long way from being a math teacher and noticing that the female students weren't necessarily achieving the way they might, to opening this Pandora's box of discovery that you've clearly been reveling in lately. But how do we relate back? How are we going to help these young women? What you've discovered and accomplished, how are we going to assimilate that and apply it to fixing society's ills?
I think that archaeology is actually going to serve as a bridge, and it's going to allow the past to educate the future and to help empower them once they're aware of this legacy of history. Because you're growing up, as a female, hearing about male God, male this, male that, and the demeaning of the women. Like, for instance, it used to be that in the Catholic Church you had to wear the little white gloves, and of course we thought that was because we were special, but no, it's because women were considered unclean and impure, and so we weren't supposed to approach the altar. So you start learning some of these things, and it's like, maybe our history is a little richer and a little stronger, and we have a greater heritage behind us to help empower the generations that are coming up behind us here. And that's what we eventually hope to attain. Just like you guys are trying to do. You're trying to promote your message and get it out there.
And we think it's all related, and we think it's all really, really important. The missing goddess. We just got a few minutes left. Why don't you tell us again what's the Facebook page? Do you have a website? And when and where to look for the next books? What's going on with?
And how to help out? How to donate and help out?
The website is goddessasherah.com, and off from that, there's a lot of free material available. We have pages and pages of free material and free information and links and resources available for people to help spread the word. The book is available through Amazon, and at a 20% discount if you go through the website, and the website tells you, what little code to put in and that kind of stuff. The Facebook page, I think it's Asherah, Wife of God, and Pinterest. We also have a little video clip on YouTube that tells a little bit about some of the inscriptional information, and we might have a little bit more to post. And I understand you guys are going to do a video on this, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll put a blog together with the info, your bio, and where to find all the sites and your information, and then also we'll create a video of this interview and implant some nice pictures, some pictures that correlate to the information that we're talking about.
Good. I'll be glad to send you something from the websites, too, if you might be able to use them.
Yeah, we'd love that. We'd love that.
Okay.
I'm going to let you go with one more question. Tell us, I wanted to fit this in somewhere. Tell us about the fiction of ancient Israel and the use of the Syro-Palestinian corridor.
Oh, yeah. The ancient Israel concept is one that's been kind of foisted upon us all, and we're all saddled with it. As you look at some of the work that a lot of scholars have done, they refer to it, with quotes around it. The Syro-Palestinian corridor is a more accurate terminology, and I chose to use that because what we have here is a trade for empires of the day. We did not have a nation entitled Israel that was dominant in that particular culture at that particular time. And so for people, although you look back and you're thinking, okay, we're talking about the old time in that land, well, yes, you are, but to put a term on it that isn't really honest is not something that the academics and the scholarship want to do. So it's just more honest to say, okay, we're talking about the Syro-Palestinian corridor, which does turn out to be the home of all three of the Abrahamic religious traditions. And unfortunately for them, there's been thousands of female artifacts that have been discovered around that area. So that is not something that makes them happy at all, because that, of course, is an area where the women are not supposed to be found, but yet that's where we're finding this treasure trove of archaeological information here that's rewriting and forcing a rewriting of our history.
So ancient Israel as a nation never really existed, is what you're saying.
No. It can't be verified.
My own research is, my own research is, in fact, the limited research I've done is exposed a controversial 30-year period under David, perhaps, where he united the tribes and called it Israel for a while. But it's interesting that you bring that up in terms of the modern conflict. Do you have a stand on that? Are you do you feel like modern Israel has sort of been foisted on the people of the region because of this, the myth of ancient Israel?
Perhaps. However, this brings to mind an article that your listeners and your audience might find quite interesting. It's in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it was a panel of archaeologists got together at Ben Gurion University, and they invited the public to come so that they could talk to them about what the archaeological information has revealed about the Old Testament history. And the archaeologists were quite surprised because they thought they were doing a pretty good job, letting people know what was going on and what they were finding. But the audience was totally shocked to hear some of the information that they were told by the archaeologists, that there was no archaeological information to substantiate Abraham, Moses, Isaac. There was no Israelites that made a mass exodus from Egypt. They were not slaves in Egypt, and this was quite startling information for the archaeologists. I don't have that in front of me right now, but your viewers could Google it at the Chronicles, learn of their history. I believe it was first published in the Jerusalem Post, and this was in the year 2000. So when you're looking back at this much of information that was available then, and here we are 15 years later, and so many people are still unaware of it. And this gets to the heart of what is ancient Israel, because it wasn't what they had led us to believe it was.
That's fascinating. And just a quick story from my personal experience when I was actually in Egypt in 2013. When we were flying home, the Egyptian newspaper was available on the airplane, and archaeologists, actually U.S. archaeologists, started digging up the grave sites of the builders of the pyramids, and they found that the builders actually were being taken care of. They had they had broken bones, and they had ancient what do you call it, the casts and things like that. So they actually were trying to help the builders, as they got hurt. So that kind of goes against the whole they were slaves concept, because you're not going to give a cast to a slave to keep them working,
Correct, and also they ate better than most of the population at that time too. They've done an analysis of some of the bones in the kitchen and the remnants of some of the food articles that were left in the pots, and they ate like kings. They were better fed than anyone else in the land, except for the kings and the holy family. They wanted them able-bodied and able to do work well for them.
Absolutely. It was the government's project, and that's what the people that joined wanted. It's just like working on a freeway or anything like that in modern day. I mean, you're working to get paid, you're working to eat, and you're working on something the government wants to work on. So
we always like to get at the background of our guests, and you mentioned that you were Catholic, and you came up with some nuns swatting your knuckles maybe, but what do you call yourself these days, if you don't mind my asking? Of course, you don't have to answer. Are you an atheist, an agnostic, or a Asherah Rastafarian?
I'm not sure. I think I'm just a lowly analyst.
Okay,
that's
fair enough.
And thank you for having me on,
said.
and thank you for all you guys are doing to try to promote this information on mythology and get this out to the public. It's definitely something that needs to be brought out in a discussion that needs to be made. We've had too much of an intellectual drought here lately.
You're absolutely right, and we're happy to do it. We're happy to share the information. We're all of us hoping to involve more women and expose the tales of the Vanquished Goddess. She's Darlene Kosnik, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us, Darlene, and take it easy.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. This is Rob Moore hanging out with Sean today. Brian will join us again next week. We don't have anything going tomorrow, or yes?
We're at Skeptic Camp tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. Yes, so no show tomorrow. And
if you're in Chicago, come on down to Skeptic Camp.
Check out Skeptic Camp. Brian will be presenting legit or full of...
Yes.
And that's bleeped out because it's a rhyme that we don't really want to... family show. And
the MM team will have a table, and we'll be hanging out and enjoying the atmosphere.
That's in Chicago. It's further downtown this year in Armitage. You guys leave yourselves another 20 minutes. It's not way on the north side like it was last year. You're going to Humboldt Park, I think, where you were born, right? That's your hood down there as a half Mexican, half Czech.
Yeah, exactly.
First generation.
Yeah, but Chicago Skeptics, look them up, support them. They're putting on a great thing tomorrow. It's free. So that's definitely something that's really nice.
We were all there last year. They have 10-minute speeches by a bunch of people, so you get a wide range of topics and not enough time to really fall asleep on it. So Beth Foyt and the gang do a great job down there, the Chicago Skeptics. So check that out and support the MM team as they present at Skeptic Camp. That's all we got. We will see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.